This will be an action-packed show as we await the arrival of 3 American hostages who were imprisoned in North Korea. We are tracking brand new Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's imminent return to America with those 3 detainees, plus a place and a date set for President Trump to meet Kim Jong-un. We've got late-breaking details and a big day on Capitol Hill as controversial CIA nominee Gina Haspel was in the hot seat, slammed by Senate Democrats over torture. Will she be confirmed? And another GOP senator says he's going to vote no. More reaction coming up. And Senator Barrasso has just been to dinner at the White House to discuss North Korea, and he joins us live with the inside scoop. Also, best-selling presidential historian John Meacham is here to weigh in on the Trump era during this defining foreign policy week. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We are awaiting the arrival of 3 Americans who were imprisoned in North Korea, successfully secured by President Trump's new Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. The freed hostages expressing deep appreciation for the Trump administration, saying America is the greatest nation in the world. You're going to see images from just outside Joint Base Andrews from moments ago. They will touch down not long from now. The president and vice president standing by to greet them. We've got team coverage tonight. Well, key developments regarding North Korea and Iran in the offing. Chief national correspondent Ed Henry will take a look at former President Obama's legacy and what President Trump is doing to dismantle it. Plus, Lauren Blanchard is live at the State Department with details of Pompeo's diplomatic efforts and what he did to get those hostages home. But we begin with Kristen Fisher, who is at the White House for us tonight. Good evening, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, it's difficult to overstate how big of a win this is for President Trump. This is one accomplishment that no one can criticize him for. No one can take away from him. And his supporters say that this is proof that his campaign of maximum pressure on North Korea is working. Now, in about 3 hours, around 2 a.m., President Trump will be leaving here, leaving the White House, heading for Joint Base Andrews. He will be joined by the Vice President, his National Security Advisor, John Bolton, and the First Lady, as all 4 of them are there to welcome these 3 newly freed Americans home.
Nobody thought this was going to happen, and if it did, it would be years or decades, frankly. Nobody thought this was going to happen. And I appreciate Kim Jong-un doing this and allowing them to go.
Now, the 3 Americans appear to be in good health. They were able to walk on the plane without assistance, which is a big deal because, remember, the last American to be freed by the North Koreans under President Trump's watch was Otto Warmbier, who returned in a coma and died just a few days later after landing back home on American soil. For Republicans like Colorado Senator Cory Gardner, he believes the difference in outcomes can be attributed at least partly to one thing, and that is the president's tough talk, his tough tweets, and all those tough sanctions.
What has happened differently since that action, since that death, that tragic death, is the application of maximum pressure. The only reason this is happening is because President Trump believes in the maximum pressure doctrine. This wouldn't have happened under the strategic patience doctrine.
Now, Senator Gardner is one of 6 Republican lawmakers who had dinner with the president at the White House tonight. And shortly before, Senator Gardner said that the focus of this dinner would be what next in North Korea? How do we get to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? And if we get there, how do we verify it? Well, today the White House said it viewed this prisoner release as a gesture of goodwill, but the overall goal remains the same.
The president views this as a positive gesture and a step in the right direction from the North Korean leader. However, total denuclearization will remain the top priority.
So now the big question is, when and where will this big summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un take place? Well, today the president shot down the DMZ as a possible option. So now speculation is centering around Singapore in early June. The president said that he's planning on announcing that exact location and date sometime within 3 days. But tonight, Shannon, the entire focus is on the well-being and the welcome home of these 3 Americans. Shannon, tonight, for the first time in almost a decade, there are no American citizens being detained in North Korea.
And that is good news for everyone. Kristen, thank you very much. Well, the planes are en route. We are tracking their arrival. Let's turn now to Lauren Blanchard live at the State Department with details. More that we're learning now about Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his diplomatic efforts to get this done. Good evening, Lauren.
Good evening, Shannon. Well, in just a few hours, President Trump is expected to greet these Americans as they return home. But first, let's take a look at their journey across the world. First, they flew from Pyongyang, North Korea, to Yokota Air Base in Japan. From there, the government planes flew to Anchorage, Alaska to refuel. They are scheduled to arrive in the middle of the night at Joint Base Andrews here in the Washington area, likely just before 3 a.m. That's where the president says he will personally greet the flights when they land. One plane is carrying the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who was able to secure the release of the three men and says he is, quote, thrilled. The other larger plane carrying the freed prisoners because it was better equipped for the men to receive medical attention. Here's what we know about the three Americans. Tony Kim and Kim Hok-sung both were working at the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology when they were arrested in the spring of 2017. And Kim Dong-chol, who was arrested in 2015 and had been sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. They had all been jailed by North Korea for anti-state activities and so-called hostile acts. And we are told the now freed prisoners were well enough to walk onto the plane without assistance. The State Department releasing this statement from the men reading, "We would like to express our deep appreciation to the United States government, President Trump, Secretary Pompeo, and the people of the United States for bringing us home. We thank God and all of our families and friends who prayed for us and our return. God bless America, the greatest nation in the world." And the release of these three Americans, no small feat for the newly confirmed Secretary Pompeo. In newly released photos from North Korean state TV, it shows smiles during Pompeo's 90-minute meeting with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un as they talked about the upcoming summit with President Trump. The time, date, and location of that summit has been set. Details still not out there, though. There was uncertainty if the release was even going to happen. Secretary Pompeo flashed crossed fingers to reporters before the announcement of amnesty came from the North Koreans. The North Korean official stressed it was a very hard decision for Kim to release them, and President Trump is expressing gratitude for this gesture of goodwill. And remember, this is newfound warmth between the U.S. and the North Koreans. Just a few months ago, very high tension as the North Koreans were not only threatening military bases, U.S. military bases and territories around the world, but they were also threatening the mainland. Shannon?
All right, Lauren Blanchard live at the State Department. We will check back in with you as part of our extended coverage as we await those arrivals tonight. Thank you, Lauren. Well, breaking tonight, Israel says Iranian-backed forces in Syria have fired missiles into the Golan Heights area, targeting the Israeli military. We're going to have a live report from Jerusalem coming up on that. But first, Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry is digging into President Obama's legacy and President Trump's latest efforts to dismantle it. Good evening, Ed.
Well, Shannon, great to see you. You know, after the president pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal yesterday, there was a lot of chatter from Democrats criticizing him, saying this is going to hurt America's image around the world. Well, his national security advisor, John Bolton, was out today saying just the opposite, that they believe it's going to strengthen their hand heading into these North Korean peace negotiations. And as we go through the list on the foreign policy stage, but also here domestically, there has been a seismic shift on a whole series of issues, starting with Iran, as I noted just yesterday. The president pulling out of the nuclear deal. In large part, he was able to do that because President Obama failed to codify it into either law or a specific treaty that would be voted on by the Senate. Executive action that President Trump was able to undo. Then you have TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this Asian trade deal. President also pulling the U.S. out of that, saying instead he's going to focus on trade deals with individual nations that he thinks will be better for the U.S. Then the Keystone Pipeline, as well as ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska. That was included, opening that up to oil and gas exploration, included in the tax cut, something that had not been done by many Republican and Democratic administrations. The Paris Climate Treaty, pulling out of that, another move the president did because, again, Barack Obama had just done it in an executive way, basically. Individual mandate, torn out, also included in the tax cut bill. That was a major victory for President Trump in terms of health care, making sure people will not have to pay that penalty if they do not sign up for health care. The transgender ban in the military, again, reversing Obama policies. The other big one to keep an eye on is DACA. Remember, this again is something that Barack Obama did in his re-election year in 2012 on an executive basis, did not codify it into law. That gives President Trump the ability to rip it up if he wants. He signaled he's not going to renew DACA in an executive way, but has asked Congress to act. They have not acted yet, as you know. It's a midterm election year. That is one of these moves that is still hanging out there, Shannon.
All right, Ed Henry, thank you very much. And by the way, when we wrap up Fox News at Night at 1 a.m. Eastern, be sure to join Ed for the overnight hours of coverage as we await the arrival of Secretary Pompeo and those 3 American hostages just freed from North Korea. Okay, as we look ahead to the negotiations between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, will the Senate play any role, say, ratifying a treaty, if that's what it amounts to, something that did not happen with the Iran nuclear deal? Our next guest was at the White House minutes ago discussing North Korea. Chairman of the Senate Republican Policy Committee, Senator John Barrasso, joins us live. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
Okay, what can you tell us about what you discussed at dinner? What's the mood tonight?
Well, the president was very positive, upbeat, confident. It was really good to be with him. He was optimistic. We were all congratulating him on the great news out of North Korea with Mike Pompeo coming back. Actually, Mike Pompeo was supposed to be at the dinner, and then he got called to go to North Korea, so he wasn't able to join us in the discussion. But the president is obviously, as is all Americans, happy to see these 3 American citizens home tonight. The president's heading out to the airport to greet them. But we talked about a host of things. Certainly, North Korea being top of the list. The sanctions made a big difference. North Korea, the president's eyes are wide open on this. I'm still skeptical about what can happen. We have a long history of North Korea behaving badly. But if we're going to be able to get the nuclear weapons out of North Korea in a way without military action, I think this is our best opportunity ever. Because to me, this is really about peace and stability of the world, which if we want to have safe and security at home, we need a peaceful, stable world.
Absolutely, in all quarters, and there are many trouble spots around the world, North Korea just being one of them. Steny Hoyer, Congressman, Democrat over on the other side in leadership on the House side, said this: releasing detainees is the easy part. The difficult part will be reaching an agreement with the North Koreans that establishes a strong verification regime that can ensure genuine denuclearization. Congress has yet to see a concrete strategy from the president as to how he intends to avoid giving Mr. Kim a propaganda victory without securing the kind of verifiable commitment on denuclearization necessary for any summit to be a success. And of course, you know that's been one of the critiques of the Iran deal, that the verification process didn't satisfy the critics of that deal. So how does he make sure to get it done this time? Will Kim agree to that?
Well, that's why I think it was so important for President Trump to pull out of the Iran deal. It was a bad deal from the beginning. It didn't accomplish what it was supposed to accomplish. It wasn't really set up to do the things that we wanted to have done in terms of verification, in terms of prevention of a nuclear weapon, in terms of the money that went for terrorism. All of those things made it a bad deal. I think by pulling out of that, President Trump is telling North Korea, hey, look, I'm willing to walk away from a bad deal. If it's not a good deal, I don't want any part of it. And President Obama never did bring the Iranian deal to Congress. He took it to the United Nations before he took it to the elected representatives of the United States. And I think that was a terrible mistake. And I know President Trump will not make that same mistake.
Well, and that's even those who want to see the Iran deal preserved admit that by President Obama doing it that way, it's much easier for a subsequent president to undo it. David Pattern in Newsmax wrote this yesterday. He says Obama loyalists knew all along the deal structured in 2015, the Iran nuclear deal, as an agreement rather than a treaty could be swept away by the stroke of a pen. But without enough votes to win Senate ratification, they instead gambled this Iran nuclear deal would be very difficult to dismantle once it was in place. And that leads me to the question now, as the president negotiates with North Korea and he talks about that he'd like a new deal with Iran, either or both of those, do they need to come to you for a vote as a senator as a treaty?
Well, I think it's better if they do. The Constitution is very clear. Article 2, Section 2, Paragraph 2, the first sentence describes what has to happen with Senate verification. It's very clear that's the best way to do it. President Obama couldn't get the votes for the Iranian deal because it was such a bad deal. It gave them lots of money, didn't prevent a nuclear weapon from being developed. I thought it actually paved the way for that weapon to be developed, allowed strategic missiles to be developed, all of the things that were wrong about it. And we know that Iran with a nuclear weapon makes the world less safe, less stable, less secure. The same thing with North Korea, and why the president is so focused on getting the nuclear weapons out of North Korea, because North Korea with a nuclear weapon, and they have nuclear weapons, makes the world less safe, stable, and secure.
Well, and now he gets ready to head into those negotiations. Hot off a dinner with him discussing that. Senator Barrasso, thanks for making time to stop in.
Well, thanks. We had a lot of other discussion points. The economy, which is doing so well. Consumer confidence is up. Unemployment at an all-time 17-year low because we've cut the taxes. We've gotten rid of the regulations. All of the things that President Trump promised to do, he's making happen for a much better, stronger America First economy.
Yeah, and more other things in the pipeline as well. We'll watch for those. Thank you, Senator.
Appreciate it.
All right, we are checking in on the hostages' progress toward Joint Base Andrews frequently. We're going to be live all night here on Fox News. Ed Henry's going to pick up coverage in a couple of hours, so stay with us. But next, President Trump's pick to lead the CIA, Gina Haspel, facing a tough Senate hearing. Democrats questioning her credentials and her moral compass. But she's not backing down without a fight.
I think we did extraordinary work. To me, the tragedy is that the controversy surrounding the interrogation program, I fully understand that, but it has cast a shadow over what has been a major contribution to protecting this country.
Joins us with the recap of the hearing and to tell us if Haspel will have a difficult path forward now toward actual confirmation. Plus, we'll be joined by a guest who knows Gina Haspel very well. He worked with her, Daniel Hoffman. He's a former CIA station chief who served in Iraq, Pakistan, and Moscow. His unique insights live when we return next. Programs of the past, then on her vision for the future of the CIA. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge reports tonight from Capitol Hill. Catherine.
At her confirmation hearing, the first woman nominated to lead the CIA said the controversial post-9/11 interrogation program that critics call torture is a thing of the past.
My moral compass is strong. I would not allow CIA to undertake activity that I thought was immoral, even if it was technically legal.
Democrats repeatedly pressed the CIA veteran, who spent 32 years undercover, on her role in the destruction of videotapes documenting the waterboarding of at least one al-Qaeda operative.
Were you an advocate for destroying the tape?
I absolutely was an advocate if we could within and conforming to U.S. law, and if we could get policy concurrence to eliminate the security risk posed to our officers by those tapes.
Haspel said her supervisor made the call.
Mr. Rodriguez, who was the deputy director for operations, has made it clear that he and he alone made the decision to destroy the tapes.
Haspel said multiple reviews found there was no legal requirement to keep the videos because the interrogations were transcribed in CIA cables that are official records. Some Democrats were not satisfied.
Do you think that a transcript that says the detainee continued to scream or the detainee appeared to be drowning has the same gravity, the same reality as an actual video?
For 3 years, the videotape issue lingered. Haspel said CIA officers were visible and at risk.
The concern was an irresponsible leak of our officers' faces to the world.
Stop resisting! Demonstrators interrupted the public session a handful of times as Democrats pressed for more information.
I would really like to have on the record whether you ever called for the program to be continued, which it sure sounds to me like your answer suggested.
After 9/11, I didn't look to go sit on the Swiss desk. I stepped up. I was not on the sidelines. I was on the front lines in the Cold War, and I was on the front lines in the fight against al-Qaeda.
President Obama's CIA Director John Brennan was a senior manager when the interrogation program was implemented and still got confirmed with strong support from Democrats. By contrast, Haspel was a more junior employee with no policy authority.
You and this president are being held to a double standard.
If you had been nominated by President Obama, or if Hillary Clinton had won and nominated you to be the CIA director, how many votes do you think you would have gotten?
After the hearing, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin confirmed to Fox News that he will now vote for Haspel. Senate Majority Whip John Cornyn believes other Democrats will follow, and Haspel will be easily confirmed. Republicans want to vote on the floor the week of May 20th before the Memorial Day recess. Shannon?
Catherine, thank you very much. Well, despite Senator Manchin's support, Haspel went head-to-head with a number of Democratic senators today, many still resistant to her nomination. Let's get reaction from Fox News contributor Daniel Hoffman, also a former CIA station chief, and you know Gina Haspel well. What did you make of the hearing? You were there today.
I was there, and Gina's a friend and one of my former bosses, and I think the world of her. I think she's absolutely the right person to lead the CIA. I was a little disappointed in the hearing. There wasn't one question about terminating the Iran nuclear deal. There wasn't anything asked about North Korea. We were focusing, the Democratic senators were focused on something that was already litigated, many, over a decade ago. And assessing Gina's moral compass based on her actions 14, 15 years ago was surprising to me, because they've all been meeting with her for the past 15 months in her capacity as deputy director. She's been testifying on Capitol Hill. She's been meeting with senators privately. They should be able to assess whether she has the moral compass I know she has, fit for the job through that interaction,
Well, and she was asked numerous times about whether she would disavow the practices of the past, which were legal at the time when she was at the CIA and overseeing some of those things. Now, we hear from a GOP senator tonight, Senator McCain, and obviously people know that he was a prisoner of war. He was tortured himself. It was very different, but he's had that experience. And so he spoke tonight in a statement saying this: I believe Gina Haspel is a patriot who loves our country and has devoted her professional life to its service and defense. However, Ms. Haspel's role in overseeing the use of torture by Americans is disturbing. Her refusal to acknowledge torture's immorality is disqualifying.
I think very highly of Senator McCain. I absolutely don't begrudge him his views. But I would highlight that, at least in my view, the means, the methods, the results of the CIA program should not be equated with what Senator McCain was subjected to in Vietnam. That was torture. I've seen torture in Iraq, and what the CIA did was nothing of the sort. And I think we really hurt the discussion. We frame the discussion improperly when we frame it that way, as if it was torture of the sort that we see in other places. And the other issue that I don't think that some senators on the Democratic side are willing to admit is that our program actually worked. That the intelligence we obtained helped us to locate and ultimately kill Osama bin Laden, among other al-Qaeda operatives.
Yeah, and we've seen that the Obama Justice Department and 2 or 3 federal judges said the same thing, that you actually obtained life-saving intelligence because of those practices. I want to ask you about another thing, because I didn't see the entire hearing today. Did the issue of Russia come up? Because that is something that Haspel is very familiar with.
She absolutely is. And she's one of the great subject matter experts on Russia. I can't think of a better person right now to be the director of the CIA, with her background and knowledge of the language and the operation.
It's such a hot topic on the Hill, especially among Democrats. Were you surprised she didn't get questions?
I absolutely was surprised. I would have thought, when I was thinking, this was a hearing for the American people. There's a classified hearing for the senators. This one was the opportunity for our senators to ask Ms. Haspel about the most important issues of the day. And if Russia is indeed one of those issues, and I believe that it is, and I think when Mitt Romney was a candidate, he was vilified and called an old Cold Warrior for calling out Russia as a major geopolitical threat to the United States. He was right. But I was quite chagrined that the Democratic senators didn't spend a little bit more time on Russia and the meddling that they did in our electoral process and the threat that they posed to us, including in Syria, among other places around the world. And a little less time on relitigating stuff from 15 years ago.
Especially given that this committee has actually looked into that specific issue and done a lot of study of it. Daniel Hoffman, thank you for your service to our country and for joining us tonight to give us some background.
Thanks, real pleasure.
All right, Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, released information alleging the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, got money from a Russian oligarch. Now, the Treasury Department and a respectable, prominent Israeli newspaper are looking into Avenatti. Trace is tracking it all down. And with Secretary alleged one-night stand with the president in 2006. Well, tonight, a Treasury Department watchdog confirms it is now probing how Daniels' attorney got those private bank records. So now he is in the crosshairs. Trace Gallagher is working the case tonight. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. Stormy Daniels' attorney Michael Avenatti still won't say how he obtained financial documents related to payments made to President Trump's attorney Michael Cohen. But Avenatti says he is 100% confident the information is accurate, though tonight that statement appears to be inaccurate. Certainly some of the transfers laid out by Avenatti did happen. The drug company Novartis and AT&T have both acknowledged paying Michael Cohen for insight into how the administration would operate. So too did Columbus Nova, an American firm whose biggest client is controlled by Russian billionaire Viktor Vekselberg. But Michael Avenatti alleges the payment from Columbus Nova was actually made by Vekselberg. The company flatly denies it, quoting, "Reports that Viktor Vekselberg used Columbus Nova as a conduit for payments to Michael Cohen are false. Neither Viktor Vekselberg nor anyone else outside of Columbus Nova was involved in the decision to hire Cohen or provided funding for his engagement." We should note Vekselberg and AT&T were both questioned by special counsel Robert Mueller regarding those payments. But Michael Avenatti also speculates the money from Columbus Nova was to reimburse the $130,000 of hush money paid to Stormy Daniels, though Avenatti has no documents to back up his claim. And it turns out two other alleged fraudulent payments laid out by Avenatti were cases of mistaken identity. They were reportedly paid to Michael Cohen's, but not the one who represents the president. So where did Avenatti get his information, both correct and incorrect? Business Insider says it's likely they came from SARs, or suspicious activity reports. Those are filed by banks and casinos with the Treasury Department to document unusual activity like transactions over $10,000. And we have confirmed tonight the Inspector General for the Treasury Department is looking into how these documents got out. Attorney and writer Andrew McCarthy has an idea. Watch.
If the IG from the Treasury Department is opening an investigation, that's a pretty good sign that they think it came from the government.
Yeah, and here's the White House on whether Michael Cohen may have been peddling access to the president. Watch.
Is the president concerned that major corporations were giving money to somebody very close to him at a time when they had business before the federal government?
I haven't heard the president express any specific concerns about us.
Certainly, Viktor Vekselberg didn't gain any favor. He was among the Russian oligarchs that were sanctioned by the Trump administration. Shannon.
Trace Gallagher live for us in Los Angeles. Thank you very much. Time now for a real news roundup. The New York Times running a story questioning Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's whereabouts during President Trump's announcement yesterday that he's scrapping the Iran nuclear deal. The headline, at a key moment, Trump's top diplomat is again thousands of miles away. The Times claims state employees were quote unquote speechless when asked why Pompeo didn't delay his Korean diplomatic mission by a day amid, as the Times puts it, private complaints by European emissaries. Turns out he was meeting with Kim Jong-un and securing the release of those 3 American hostages now on their way home. President Trump tweeting late tonight, the failing New York Times criticized Secretary of State Pompeo for being AWOL, missing, when in fact he was flying to North Korea. Fake news so bad. That report coming in today's White House briefing. It came up again where Press Secretary Sarah Sanders mixed it up with reporters over a presidential tweet about media bias. Quote, "The fake news is working overtime. Just reported that despite the tremendous success we are having with the economy and all things else, 91% of the network news about me is negative. Parentheses fake. Why do we work so hard in working with the media when it is corrupt? Take away credentials? Question mark.
We are here. We are taking questions. We are doing everything we can to provide regular and constant information to the American people. And there is a responsibility by you guys to provide accurate information.
Sarah Sanders says the White House is committed to a free press. Well, the war of words and now missiles as tensions escalate between Iran and Israel after President Trump's decision to leave the Iran nuclear deal. We're going to take you live to Israel, where Benjamin Hall is standing by with the very latest details. And with the American hostages now on their way home from North Korea and peace a real possibility with the Hermit Kingdom, will President Trump get any credits? A Nobel Peace Prize? Well, plenty of his critics give an emphatic no. We'll ask best-selling author and presidential historian John Meacham, who joins us next. Andrews just outside the D.C. area, where the president and vice president will be standing by to greet 3 freed American hostages home fresh from North Korea. They're expected to touch down shortly. We're tracking that flight, and it looks like they've got fire trucks out there. You can see the aerials there, a huge American flag to welcome them home as they're finally back on U.S. soil shortly. We're tracking them. Breaking tonight, Israeli defense forces say Iranian forces have fired about 20 rockets from Syria into the Golan Heights area. The target, reportedly the Israeli military. Benjamin Hall is live in Jerusalem with details for us. Hello, Benjamin.
Yeah, hi, Shannon. You know, Israeli sources say that just after midnight here in Israel, Iran fired, as you say, 20 rockets from inside Syria into the Golan Heights in the north of this country. And if that is true, that is the first time Iran has taken such action against Syria from inside, against Israel from inside Syria using rockets. A big escalation of this already tense situation. According to the Israeli Defense Forces, a number of rockets were intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system, but not all of them. And a military spokesman blamed Iran's Foreign Al-Quds force for the attack. No casualties have yet been reported. A pro-Syrian TV station, though, has claimed that over 50 rockets were in fact fired into the Golan Heights and says that they were targeting Israeli troops and forward bases in the area. Yesterday, there was a rare strike near Damascus, but tonight, the Syrian capital was said to shake with the sound of explosions. Reports suggest Israeli planes were targeting radar and air defense systems in retaliation. Sarah Sanders said earlier today that Iran's attack shows President Trump was right.
This just further shows that the Iranian regime cannot be trusted. Israel absolutely has a sovereign right to defend itself.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's currently visiting Vladimir Putin in Moscow, has always said he would never allow Iran to develop a permanent military presence in Syria. He also told Putin yesterday that Israel had a right to defend itself. Meanwhile, Iranian politicians have been burning American flags in parliament, screaming death to America in response to the U.S. leaving the Iran deal. Iran has also said it's preparing to restart uranium enrichment if the deal collapsed. In response to that, Saudi Arabia has warned that if Iran pursued a bomb, so would they. In better news, though, we are only a few days away from the opening of the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, and so grateful are Israelis that they have named a square the U.S. square in honor of President Donald Trump. So a lot of news happening in this area at the moment, but of course that big one, that Iran launched rockets into northern Israel. Israel has retaliated against their positions in Syria, and so we wait to see whether that escalates or whether that is it for the moment. Shannon?
All right, Benjamin Hall, live for us in Jerusalem. Thank you very much. Well, 18 Republicans are pushing for President Trump to get the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts on the Korean Peninsula. But there is a debate underway on Capitol Hill over whether President Trump should get any credit for bringing home the 3 American hostages. We're looking live there as we await their arrival at Joint Base Andrews. As we've been reporting, they are on their way, set to arrive soon. We are tracking them. Of course, we'll take you live there when that happens.
The only reason this is happening is because President Trump believes in the maximum pressure doctrine. This wouldn't have happened under the strategic patience doctrine.
Our American citizens to come home. But when I look at the whole deal with North Korea, it seems to me that all of what was started with President Moon.
Our next guest has authored a seminal biography on former President George H.W. Bush and other bestsellers. What does he think about the emerging Trump doctrine? Let's welcome John Meacham. His brand new book, The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels, hit bookstores yesterday. John, great to have you with us tonight.
Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, so everyone's looking around to see who should and shouldn't get credit for the fact that these guys are coming home, and in addition, the fact that Kim Jong-un has been reaching out to South Korea, to China, and now potentially sitting down with President Trump. By the way, as that comes together, it's not happened yet. If it does, in the scope of presidential history, how historic is that?
It'll depend on what emerges out of those talks. It's certainly progress. It's about engagement, the doctrine of engagement, of trying to figure out whether we can strike deals that will bring stability and peace to that part of the world is essential. The world has never been smaller, and we're living in one where there are 9 members of a nuclear club, all of whom have the capacity to inflict unthinkable, almost unimaginable damage. And so, unquestionably, it seems to me that the American interest is to try to bring stability and try to contain, as much as possible, a dictator who we don't know simply whether or not he's a rational actor or not.
Yeah, and a number of administrations over the years have tried and failed, had some stops and starts, things that looked like they were going to be successful. Ultimately, North Korea was not an honest participant in much of that. I want to read you something from the Washington Post, a David Ignatius piece. He says this: would Kim have moved toward negotiations regardless of who was president? We'll never know. But there's no denying that Trump's confrontational approach created an opportunity for crisis diplomacy, and that he was bold enough to embrace Kim's offer of direct talks. What do you make of that characterization of how we got here?
It seems right to me. Sometimes, as the former Secretary of State used to say, Jim Baker, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. We're having potentially a level of negotiation and engagement again that we've struggled for. The nature of the presidency historically is you can get credit for good things that happen on your watch, even if you didn't have a whole lot to do with them. You also get a lot of blame historically for things that go wrong on your watch, over which you had very little control. That's the nature of the job. Woodrow Wilson once said that the nature of the presidency was it allowed a man to be as big as he could. And we've also seen in our history, and I think a lot of people are worried today, that the president can also be as small as he might be. This doctrine, this idea of offering a threat, maximum pressure, I think is the phrase. If it works, then historians will look back and say having someone with a kind of bluster who then followed it up with careful diplomacy was a winning formula. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, and one of the key players in all of these discussions over the decades has been China. And there are a lot of people who think now China is the key actor in moving this thing forward. There have been scores of UN resolutions and sanctions, but it seems something different is happening this time around with China, at least in the last few months. There have been some skirting of the sanctions, but in some cases, a tougher application of those sanctions by China. How much do they get the credit?
I don't think we can apportion it until we know more. I think what's unquestionable is the story of Korea, of the Korean Peninsula, and of its implications for us is a story that goes back to the late 1940s. It's also, the entire drama is also a reminder of how important it is that while elections do have consequences, the country does have commitments. The peninsula has been the home of U.S. troops for 68 years or 70 years or so. We're talking about nearly 3/4 of a century of a projection of force in an attempt to create a stable country in the South. And one might hope that there'll be some reform in the North. China is very invested in this because they don't want North Korean refugees. They don't want a nuclear war in their neighborhood. All of this, and the Iran news, the Korean, hostages coming back, the detainees coming back, and the talks with North Korea remind us of how important all this is. This is about nuclear proliferation, which is arguably the most fundamental foreign policy story since 1945. Yeah. And Democrats and Republicans have both approached it in different ways through the years. And I think we hope for the best and we prepare for the worst.
Always a good idea. John Meacham, thank you for joining us and congrats on the new book.
Thanks so much.
Good to see you. All right, it was not long ago that some in the media and some pundits said President Trump was putting the U.S. on the path to nuclear war with North Korea. But as the two countries appear to be possibly getting closer to peace than ever before, will those critics admit they could be wrong? Our panel standing by and ready to debate. Back then, experts predicted disaster.
We're actually closer, in my view, to a nuclear war with North Korea and in that region than we've ever been.
We're probably closer to an outright war with North Korea than we have been in a very, very long time.
They could easily construe what he's been saying as a declaration or at least a threat of war.
I think that we should be concerned that this escalatory rhetoric between the leaders of two countries that have nuclear weapons is slipping very quickly into something that could become very dangerous for the planet.
Talk about it with tonight's panel, Leslie Marshall, Fox News contributor, and Larry O'Connor, a radio host on WMAL in Washington, D.C. Welcome to both of you.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi. Hi, Shannon.
Well, Larry, listen, this thing is far from over. The president hasn't even sat down with Kim Jong-un yet. Are those folks wrong? Is that premature to say they would be?
Well, listen, you're right. It's way premature. Tonight's a pretty optimistic night, frankly, with the release of these 3 Americans. And, forget about trust but verify when it comes to North Korea. We should distrust, verify, confirm, and re-verify and reconfirm. I mean, we've been burned for decades. But it is a remarkable thing to witness. That montage is so telling that so much of the smart set here in Washington, they get paid big bucks telling us what is going to happen, what the president is going to do, and more importantly, what this president is going to fail at. Maybe they should be a little circumspect. Maybe they should look at their own failings, the fact that they haven't been able to get much done with North Korea in the time that they were in power. And let's face it, they don't have a very good track record when it comes to telling us how President Trump is going to fail. From his campaign in the Republican Party, winning the Republican nomination, beating Hillary Clinton. So far, they're pretty bad at telling us what President Trump is going to fail at.
Let's bring in Leslie here. Do you think he gets any credit, wins any of these critics over? Leslie?
It really depends what happens. I mean, it's hard for me, and I think anyone else, regardless of our ideology, to believe that an egotistical dictator who has lied to his people and brainwashed his people, and so did his father and so did his grandfather, both of which, by the way, had promised to dismantle their nuclear weapons and did not. And we came close in '94 and '03, but it hasn't happened. I think it's very hard to trust, especially that he would just, have a 360-degree turnaround. In addition, not asking for America's troops to leave South Korea. Of course, we should be celebrating tonight, obviously, any individual that is released from captivity from any country, regardless of who is in the administration. But in this case, who is in the administration, that does matter. And those people that we just talked, Fat Lady hasn't sung yet. We have Bolton and we have Pompeo, who are both pretty much hawkish on North Korea.
Guys, we are pressed because of extended coverage tonight that we've got as we stand by and wait for the hostages' arrival here just outside D.C. Stay with us.